What does it mean to live a resilient life? I'm Ryan Manion. I lost my brother to war and my mom to cancer, and I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Now, as the CEO of Travis Manion Foundation, I'm on a journey to explore what it means to be resilient against life's many challenges. Join me and some incredible guests as we ask ourselves the hard questions and define what it means to struggle well. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Resilient Life podcast. And I don't know if you know, but you've actually been one of our most requested guests.
I have.
You have.
Okay.
Yeah, so
that?
we will put out a few times throughout the year, like who people want to hear from. And we get a lot of big names, and then we get a lot of your dad.
Oh, okay.
So here you are.
All right.
We've got my dad in the studio today in person. So welcome.
Good to finally be here.
Welcome, Dad. Yeah. So
Welcome home.
yeah. And you know, what I typically do when I have a guest on is, we do a lot of prep. We want to understand what things we want to talk to them about. And our team, as we were going through this, they said, well, you don't need a prep doc, it's your dad. And I said, I actually feel like I need a prep doc even more, because I just don't, like, what do we talk about? Right? Like, we could talk about anything and everything. So
So much to cover,
there's
right?
so much to cover.
Yeah.
This may be a multiple part
Yeah.
series.
Maybe come back next year too.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. But as we're leading into Memorial Day week, obviously, I want to talk about that. But one of the things that I get asked a lot, and I thought it would be important to understand and get your insight on it, is, people want to know what Travis was like as a child. And I obviously have, my memories of what growing up with Travis was like, but I'd love to kind of hear from you, what it was like growing up with Travis and I, like raising Travis and I. And I talk a lot about how we grew up in a military family. And so we were, for a large majority of our childhood, we were moving every couple of years. And I talk about what that meant and how I was always probably the one that was more adverse to making those moves. And Travis always kind of seemed eager and never really cared. But I'd love to know just kind of what it was like raising Travis and I.
Yeah.
Maybe
Wow.
raising
This
Travis.
is
Don't talk about me.
yeah. Yeah. Kind of heavy question. A lot there to cover.
There's a lot to cover.
Lot to cover. Well, first of all, let me start by saying I couldn't have been there as your dad if I didn't have your mom by my side. And as a military father, there was oftentimes I was away, and your mom was always there holding down the fort.
Mhm.
So she made it easy for me to be the best dad I could be, and it starts there. And, credit and kudos to your mom. And, early on, your mom not only was there for you guys and was there for me when I was away, but she was very engaged with you guys all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Even so much so that she went and um, she didn't need to start a job, but she wanted to be near you guys, and she worked at the school that you guys were at.
She
Just so,
was an aide
yes,
at every school we were at. She was an aide
right.
in some way.
So she was there, and she could always be there for you guys. But yeah, memories, thinking back on those times, just a lot of great times together. And we had to be close knit because we were picking up and moving every couple years. I think we moved 13 times in like 11 years. It
Yeah.
was like incredible how much we had moved. Um, but for me and your mom, it was always important to have you guys involved in stuff. So we were always, engaged with you on whatever you were doing, whether it was soccer, or whatever sport was there, you guys were signed up for it. And my recollection is you both really, nobody ever complained. I mean, you guys were into it and we were into it. And it was really a fun part of what we did together as a family. And that just sort of evolved as you got a little older. And Travis, Travis got to a point where he'd always get out there and do stuff, but in between, he didn't really work that hard. He wasn't the hardest worker. He loved sitting down and watching movies and eating
I was
Doritos.
gonna say, he loved a good I actually bought Travis, my Travis. We went to I was stopped at Wawa for dinner the other night because I said I'll pick you up a turkey sandwich, and I bought him a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos, and he said, "Why'd you get me Doritos?" And I said, "Because your uncle Travis loved a good bag of Cool Ranch Doritos."
Yeah, Travis certainly did. And I don't know when it was. I think it was he kept, going with athletics, and then he just hit a spurt between seventh and eighth grade. And, as soon as he hit that spurt, his attitude started to change. And he went from a guy that loved the couch and loved Doritos to one of the hardest workers that I've ever seen in
Yeah.
terms of making himself, on the athletic side. Now, academically, it
He was
was
always
always
smart.
very gifted, and,
Yep.
and he never really had a problem in school.
Yep.
And then on the other side of that, because of that, he always had a quick wit. He was a pretty
He was
funny guy. And last part of it is the thing I'm really remember about him is he had a big heart. He was a very caring person.
was. So I remember, and well, I'll ask you this first and then I'll share a story of his caring heart. But what if you think back on all those moves, what was your favorite place that we ever lived? Now I know mine. I want to know what yours was.
Ooh, that's a tough one because it's about being in a good spot. And for me, it didn't always correlate to the job that I had at the time.
Hmm.
But we certainly, when you guys first arrived on the scene, we certainly had a wonderful time. Your mom and I down at Camp Lejeune when you guys were little ones. I had a great job with First Battalion, 10th Marines, and we got to serve with a lot of wonderful people. In terms of a home, I really did enjoy our time in the Fort Hunt, Mount Vernon area.
Was mine. Bainbridge Road.
Bainbridge Road,
That
7919.
that was my favorite place. It,
Yeah,
it was a little brick rancher,
yeah,
and I just have such great memories of the whole street had kids. There was a kid in it was like
yeah,
that bucolic, kid in every house. I remember playing manhunt in sewers and just running around. And really, that idea of like you got on your bikes and then you came home when it was dark,
yeah.
And we certainly did that as kids.
A lot of that.
And I remember when we were living there, speaking about Travis's big heart, we had an awesome backyard. We had a ton of trees around our house.
Yeah,
And
you had the little clubhouse
we
back.
had a little clubhouse back there. That's where the Tiger Club was first generated. We had this
Yeah,
club called the Tiger Club. You made us
remember
cards. Yep.
that I helped you out with that.
Yes. And
Just about the dead bird story?
yes, it is. And so there was a bird's nest that had fallen out, and a bunch, and
The funeral for
there
the
was a
dead bird.
there was a couple baby birds that had died, and mom was like, "Oh, that's a shame. Let me get it." And Travis was like, "No." And he planned a funeral for these birds, and all the kids in the neighborhood like came, and he dressed up as the priest, and we had this like funeral at our house for these baby birds. And I think about that now, like, um, but he was very affected by those birds out in the front yard. Like it was his heart, and that's just
Right.
how he was.
Yes.
So, um,
Always caring for
yeah.
others. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, one of the things that I always think about, you talk about that shift that Travis took from in 7th and 8th grade. And let's go back to this idea of, because I remember, I feel like Travis and I shifted in different ways. So he kind of like hit his stride going into high school, and I like pulled back and became more just, I don't want to say uncaring, but like apathetic to, whatever. I'm just going to kind of coast through. And you always used to say to me, your thing to me when you would try to give me pep talks, you'd be like, you're the natural born athlete. Like you're wasting your potential. Like Travis has to work really hard at it. And I remember you always saying that to me. And that was kind of your way to, try to get me going. And uh Travis started to make that change, but why do you think he did? Like, what was it? What do you think clicked inside of him that all of a sudden he had this appetite to be a better athlete, to excel, to set goals? Because I'm asked that a lot and I don't know how to answer that question. And in fact, I say, I think it was a lot about the mentorship that he was given from you and even Uncle Chris. Um, but I don't know what it was. Like, is there anything you can pinpoint?
I'm not sure. Not sure I can put a finger on it, but like you, I think it probably comes a little bit with the encouragement.
Mhm.
I was never really hard on Travis in terms of pushing him too much. I always encouraged him. And I think he saw, from his uncle Chris, that same encouragement. And he started to see how it could have an impact. He started to work a little bit harder. And when he worked a little bit harder, he had a little bit more success.
Mhm.
And it just, at that point, it just snowballed.
Yeah.
And he just, like, I think I think it was his nature to whatever he got into, he really got into it.
Yeah.
He became very intense no matter what he was doing, if it was making sure the Doritos were there or or the TV shows that he liked. When he put his mind to something, he was all in.
Yeah.
And I think it was a lot about him being, once he saw what it meant to work hard and what came out of that, he decided he was all in for that. And it just snowballed because it just kept coming with more and more success on that athletic end.
Well, and it's funny because if you look at pictures of Travis in like 6th and 7th grade, and, I mean, what was his nickname?
Well, 6th and 7th is he was on the football team, they called him Pork Chop.
Exactly. He
Yeah,
was a little chubby kid.
yeah,
And then you look at his freshman picture at LaSalle, his freshman wrestling picture, and he is just ripped. I mean, he's not huge yet. He hadn't had that big growth spurt,
right,
but he didn't have an ounce of fat on him. He was just
yeah.
just muscles, And
Yeah, and it started just when he became when he was a freshman in high school because he was the only freshman that was a starter on the wrestling team that won the league.
yeah.
And so things like that further encouraged him to even jump in even more and work harder. And each time he did that, each time he upped his work level, the rewards just came tenfold.
Yeah. And we talk about um all the different sports, and that is one thing that I, looking back, appreciate so much, that we did everything. I mean, we did every sport. Soccer, t-ball, every sport under the sun, we tried. And it was kind of cool because growing up, Travis and I were on a lot of the same sports teams when we were young because
Yeah.
they were co-ed teams. So we would play on the same teams. I got really into basketball when I was young. Um, and Travis really hadn't found what his sport was. He was trying a little bit of everything. And he ended up gearing towards wrestling. Um, but I look back on, again, you were a lacrosse player and a football player and a basketball player. Like you didn't have any wrestling. And so, Uncle Chris was a really good wrestler. So, I mean, that was the only kind of wrestling lineage within our family. But for you, like, what made you decide, and not that you decided, but made you lean in with him and wrestling?
Well, again, when you guys were younger, we wanted you to try everything. And we got Travis into wrestling mostly because when my younger brother Chris started wrestling, I really started to learn more about it
Mhm.
and realize, how great a sport it was. I mean, I grew up in the city and we didn't have wrestling where I grew up. So I naturally played basketball growing up and played basketball in high school. Um, but when Chris got into wrestling as a family, we started to really pay attention to it. And then when we moved to Northern Virginia, there was a wrestling program and we got Travis signed up for it. We just figured it'd be good to get out there and learn that sport as well as anything else everyone was involved in. And Chris came down. Chris was so engaged and happy to hear that his nephew was taking up wrestling. And, early on, he was up for coaching him.
Yep.
And so he started coaching him. And then when we moved up in the area, he even got more engaged with Travis and wrestling. And, it was through that we put and Chris that we put, strong focus on it. And I think at the end of the day, like all you guys, like you and Travis, it's like what you enjoy. I mean, Travis actually ended up gravitating towards wrestling because he was involved in it. And even though that he didn't hit the growth spurt until seventh, eighth grade, he was always a tough wrestler. You
Well,
know?
and freshman year, what he wrestled, what, like 145, right?
Yes.
And then what did he wrestle sophomore year?
Well, let me say he wrestled freshman year, he may have been 135.
Okay, 135.
And then sophomore year, he may have bumped up to 145, which means he was weighing about 155, 160. But by the time he was a junior, he was the 189 pound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, the
So,
transformation was, like,
yeah.
enormous. When you look at his wrestling pictures throughout high school, I mean, it's dramatic from freshman year to senior year, and he excelled at all those weight classes too.
Yeah.
And I always remember, and I s I have such great memories of watching Travis wrestle in high school and being in the gym at LaSalle, and every time he walked out, uh, the stands would just chant, "It's all over." Like, that's what they would chant when Travis walked out, and, it was just such a cool experience because he had, and, when you think about the sport of wrestling now, and there's so much emphasis right now put on the sport of wrestling and how much it can build you to be a better leader, because it's such, I mean, it's one-on-one, right? It's
Right.
you against the other guy, and
No excuses.
no excuses.
You're accountable.
Well, and it's funny too because my oldest daughter, just played a lacrosse game, and
I know who Maggie is.
I know you know who Maggie is. I'm explaining to everybody else,
To the audience.
to the audience. And Uncle Chris was at the game,
Uh-huh.
and she didn't have her best game, and she walked off, and she was upset, and you know, she apologized, she thanked Chris for coming, and then she said, "I'm sorry, I'm frustrated." And Chris goes, "You know how many matches I watched with your uncle? Like, this is nothing." He said, "And imagine you walk off and you have no, like, you're it." And he said something along those lines of, like, it's
Right.
you against the other person. There's no other factors that determine why you didn't win that match.
Right.
Um, but you think about that from a life lesson perspective, and it's kind of big, and I think that really was like a bedrock in the development of who Travis became.
Yeah, it's an incredible sport that way, and it builds character. Not that Travis didn't have a strong foundation there anyway, but I think it just sort of elevated who he was in being accountable and working hard and realizing what you put in is what you get out. So um, it got more and more challenging, right? At the college level, I mean, Travis was in high school, he actually didn't lose that much. His senior year, he only had one loss by 1 point to the eventual national champion. Um, so in college, though, every match was a 1 point win or loss.
Yeah.
And everyone that he faced was super tough.
Yep.
So it's amazing, what these young men do on the Division I wrestling mat. It's tough, tough sport.
Yeah. So the other thing that a lot of people ask me all the time about Travis is, did he want to be a Marine? Did you always know that he was going to be a Marine? Did you know that he was going to follow in your dad's footsteps? Did your dad talk to him about being a Marine? And I don't remember you, like you say, you encouraged, but you never pushed us to do anything that we necessarily didn't want to do. And so, you know, I don't even remember the idea of the Naval Academy being something that Travis was thinking of until pretty late into his high school career. Now, again, that's my memories of it. But you know, I remember you would talk about being a Marine, but you necessarily weren't. You never said to either of us, like, you guys should join the Marine Corps. And so at what point did you realize that Travis was going to follow in your footsteps in that way?
Jeez. I mean, maybe maybe right before he signed the papers,
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how it was with Travis because to your point, I never talked anything about the service um except that I was serving, not to encourage either one of you guys one way or the other. If you want to talk about it, certainly would. Um, and I was very surprised Travis's senior year when he said, he was going to the Naval Academy. He wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and it was like his number one choice. Like we took you guys down to the Naval Academy a lot because I had friends down there.
I mean, we have a lot of pictures of us on the rafts in the
Yeah,
water,
yeah, we
but
went down there to see the games, and I had good friends down there, and we spent time around the academy grounds. But for me and your mom, it's sort of came out of the blue that Travis wanted to go to the Naval Academy. And then when we talked about other schools he was going to apply to, he says, "Well, I'm not applying to other schools. I'm just applying to Navy."
because remember, originally there was a lot of talk about University of Chicago.
Well, that's interesting because that is one of the other schools, and it's only because at the national preps, the University of Chicago coach was there, and it was had a really good reputation, not only academically, top of the line, and Travis could handle that academically, but also from a wrestling standpoint, it was one of the top smaller schools in wrestling.
Mhm.
And the coach was a wonderful guy, and he was at the national preps, and he wanted Travis to go there in the worst way.
Yeah.
And so we started to look at the University of Chicago, and then Travis was hell bent on the Naval Academy too, and when he found out he got in, that was it.
And
We encouraged your mom and I encouraged him to apply to other schools. I think he did the University of Chicago.
well, no, I remember mom telling a story when she was alive, like in an interview or something, where she said she actually found other applications that she thought had been mailed, like in the top drawer of his
Yeah,
nightstand.
yeah,
So we thought he had applied to other schools, but in fact, he
yeah.
actually hadn't.
It's a good thing he got into
Yeah,
the Naval
good
Academy,
thing. Yes.
or I guess he could have been at University of Chicago, but
Yes.
yes, that was it. And then beyond that, at Navy, we never talked about, listen, you're going to go Marine or anything like that. I mean, obviously,
You would have been fine either way.
I would have been fine with whatever he did
Yeah.
there. And I had friends down there that were Marines. Of course, Corky Gardner was the battalion officer, and I knew a lot of Marines at the academy. But shoot, I didn't care one way or the other what he did. And he went on a ship and he came back. He says, "Yeah, I don't think I really like it on the ship." So I knew he was ruling that out. And then there was some discussion about, well, submarines would be interesting. And I remember saying, well, yeah, you should check it out. And that was kind of my approach all along. But I think there was a culture also on the wrestling team
Yeah.
that permeated with the wrestlers around the Marine Corps.
Mhm.
And so I think that's probably the biggest influence and why he went Marines is because of people like Doug Zimbeck, who was a Marine and a wrestler before him, and
Mhm.
would come back and talk to these guys about what was happening in Iraq when Doug came back and would talk about what he was doing over there. So I think they were inspired by those guys. They were inspired by the Marines that were on the yard.
Yep. So
And
probably less about you being a Marine and more about influences he got while he was at
yeah, I think it
Navy.
was all that actually. It wasn't about me.
Mhm.
And I would have been open to anything, any type of service for sure.
But it was funny because I did find, and I keep it right there. I don't know if you can see it. So this is Travis when that picture in the apple. And it says, I would like to be a pilot in the Marine Corps. So I don't know, he looks like he's like 8 or 9 in that picture.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, maybe he was thinking about the Marine Corps at a young age. So
Well, that's maybe more the influence of you guys being around the military bases and him seeing me in my Marine uniform, and you remember the picture where he actually put on my cami
oh, I
uniform one
use that
time.
all the time.
Yeah, and he's
Standing sassily in the
giving a
background.
salute. But
Yeah.
when you go forward and when he's at the Naval Academy, I don't think it was as much me as it was these other influences. But hey, listen, to say I wasn't extremely proud that he decided to go to the Marine, absolutely. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah. It's
absolutely.
funny too because Maggie, I've talked about it on the show, is going to the Naval Academy. And she leaves here in June. And right now, if you ask her, we were at a dinner with all incoming students in the Philadelphia area, and there were some former commandants there and older Naval Academy grads, and they said, "Oh, what you're thinking? Yes, I'm going Marine ground." And like she says it so, and I'm like, "Don't
She doesn't need
you?"
the rush back.
Yeah, I'm like, you gotta see all the different options that are there. There's a lot of different, like you. I think it's important for her to kind of see um,
Sure.
and experience all the different options. So, you know, one of the things that I think about that obviously differed between my relationship with Travis and your relationship with Travis, I think um, became much more apparent when he was in Iraq. And so, people ask me a lot about my conversations with Travis. Like, well, what kind of conversations were you having with Travis? And I'm like, I mean, literally the most mundane conversations, pop culture. Like, he was asking me about clothes I was bringing into my boutiques. He would tell me to save an extra large for him in a certain shirt when I got back. Like, it was that. And I said the only conversation that it was actually the last conversation I had with Travis, um, where it was anything that kind of unnerved me was he called me, and this was probably in early April. And I said to him, "Oh, you're past the halfway point." And I made a comment like that, and he was like, I don't think about it like that. I just got to get through every day." And in that moment, I felt uneasy with how he said that to me, because I wanted him to be like, "Yep, I'll be home soon," And on his first deployment, he very much was much more like that. On his second deployment, you could tell it was minute by minute. And I remember feeling uneasy about that conversation. But I know you guys had much different conversations than I was having. So you guys had definitely some different conversations than I had. And one of the conversations you talk about a lot is after President Bush um, gave a press conference, or I don't know if it was from the Oval Office, but I remember he shared it because I was at the house that night with you and Mom. And he talked about the surge and how they were deploying more troops. And then you talked to Travis And there were mixed reviews on that, if you remember, from the public on whether or not that was the right decision. And you heard from Travis shortly after
Yeah,
that
but
decision was made.
I don't know if what my conversation with Travis wasn't related to the surge, and you know, there were mixed reviews on the surge, not because of what it meant tactically, because I don't think there was probably a better option than what was proposed in the surge, more because there was a lot of people starting to talk about total withdrawal.
Right.
So it was the surge versus, you know, total
Just pull
withdrawal.
out.
But my discussion with Travis happened shortly after that, and that's the first time really it was very close to when we lost him.
Mhm.
It was actually the week prior. So it was in April. And I think the discussion about the surge was a few months before that. So it may not even have been that closely related.
Okay.
But yeah, Travis called me and our discussions were pretty much like yours. He didn't really, when we had discussions with him, it was your mom and I that were there most of the time in those discussions together. But this last discussion, you know, your mom wasn't there, and he was much more open with me because your mom wasn't on the line.
Mhm.
And he was describing to me in a lot more detail what was happening over there. And really the essence of it, as I recall, he said, Dad, you know, it's incredible what I'm seeing over here. You know, what these Marines are doing, you know, they're putting their lives on the line every day and fighting in the streets. And, you know, I go back to Camp Fallujah and I watch what you're watching on TV, and nobody's talking about these incredible things that I'm seeing over here and what's happening and the progress we're making and the impact we're having. And, you know, those words just kept ringing in my ear the following week when we got the knock on the door.
Yeah. I think about too, you know, there was a big difference between Travis's first deployment and his second deployment. And, you know, I often talk about like in his first deployment, if I emailed him, like I would get a response very quickly. And he had a lot more downtime. He was working on the Iraqi elections. He was there as a logistician. And I even remember conversations where sometimes he would say, yeah, like some of it is like very boring, mundane work, you know? And leading up to that second deployment, I remember you having conversations with him where it was, and you actually sharing with us, being my mom and I, that this deployment was going to look very different. And in fact, we felt that right away because no one was getting personalized emails. Calls were very sporadic. He would send out, remember, he'd send out updates and there'd be 100 people on the email list, you know, and it was just like, hey, I'm just touching base. Things are good, you know. But you certainly knew it was two different deployments altogether.
Yeah, well, he was part of a military transition team. So he was an advisor to the Iraqis and he was embedded with the Iraqis. And there was, I don't know how many Marines, maybe 11, 12 Marines attached to this battalion. So,
To this Iraqi battalion.
Iraqi battalion.
Yeah.
So, you know, I just remember actually talking to him at home, and he came right before he came back and talking to him about the role of an advisor. And I remember being downstairs and saying, Trav, you know, because I kind of knew what he was all about. And I said, Trav, your role as an advisor, you know, you tell them what they need to do and then, you know, step back and, you know, make sure they execute in the right way. And he's like, yeah, Dad, I get it. Okay, let's play some pool, you know? So it wasn't surprising to me when we started to hear from the Marines when they came back that Travis was out in front with everything that he did. You know, he wasn't going to tell the Iraqis to go into a building that he wasn't ready to go in first and show them how it's done.
And in fact, there's, Joel Padrier, who was a lieutenant colonel over there when he was there, actually told you that he had a conversation with Travis over there. Like, you don't have to be the first one in, Lieutenant
Yeah,
Manion,
you have to get shot at all the time.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Like he actually was like, stop going in first. Like, why are you going in first? But that's just how he was.
it's kind of his nature,
Yeah.
and it kind of gets back to what we talk about in the foundation is if not me, and then who. And that was, when we started to think about type of person he was, that's kind of who he was.
Well, and the other thing too that, we don't talk about as much, but was Travis's relationships that he made with the Iraqis over there. So much so that you went over to Iraq,
Yeah,
to explore and understand better, the bonds that he made with the Iraqi army, when he was over there. And
Yeah.
you got a ton of insight when you were over there in Iraq.
yeah, I was there and I met with the colonel, the Iraqi colonel that was in charge of the Iraqi battalion that Travis was attached to. And I met a lot of the Iraqis that he served side by side with. And, it was good to really spend some time with them and get their insights. They had actually named a camp after Travis. After we lost Travis, they named a camp, and I visited that camp. It was a camp outside of Camp Fallujah,
An Iraqi camp.
an Iraqi camp.
Yeah.
And General Allen, when he came to Doylestown, said it was only the second time that the Iraqis had named a camp after an American. And so I went to Camp Manion and was there with the Iraqis that were at the time stationed there in 2010. And I was actually going to go down to Fallujah. In the area we lost Travis, but the patrol that we were with was concerned about going back down there because things had started to shift a little bit, and they didn't feel comfortable taking me down there. So we ended up not making that trip.
And I think one of the things that is not focused on as you look at the past 20 years of conflict, or 23 years, I should say, is those like human bonds, right? Like the fact that Travis built those bonds with the Iraqis, that, he was trying to help them build their army to protect themselves, to defend their freedoms, in the same way we do here. And, I remember that first New Year's Eve after Travis was killed, his interpreter, spent New Year's Eve with us in this house right here,
Yeah.
and talked about how Travis was a brother to him, and so you don't hear those stories. Those aren't things that you hear, when you look at these last 23 years. And, obviously there's a lot of talk about the brotherhood exists with the United States service members, but there were incredible bonds forged with Iraqis, with Afghans. I mean, we saw that in a big way with the Afghan withdrawal, how our service members were advocating for their interpreters to be safe and cared for.
Yeah, I think, the challenge is that politics, it always gets in the middle of all this. Is, I look back on those years and the relationships and the impact of guys like Travis and others that have given their all. It's hard to talk about these things without the politics entering into it. And, I choose not to do that. I choose to think about our country asked these guys to go, and they went and they served honorably. And, they did all they could do to help others.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what they're all about. That's their makeup. And so politics aside, yeah, I mean, incredible brotherhood. Like you said, Travis's interpreter, he's still now here in the States. The colonel that Travis served with, I mean, what an impressive guy. And I still remember hearing from Travis one time when he called back, he says, "Dad, this Iraqi colonel got up in front of all these Marines and he inspired us all. There was 200 Marines in the room." And that was the guy I ended up meeting. He's the guy that named Camp Manion.
And he's the guy that held the memorial service. And
yes,
and they tell that story. The Marines told that story.
we got something. Oh, here it is. We
Yeah.
got something. The plaque that he made, yeah.
Yeah. And the Marines tell that story of they were holding a memorial service for Travis in Iraq after he was killed. And the doors burst open and all these Iraqis started coming in and they got like nervous at first, like what's going on?
Right.
Well, they realized they were all coming in to pay respects to Travis. And that Iraqi colonel got up with Nick, Mustafa, Travis's interpreter, and we have it on video. And
Yeah, it's
he's standing
incredible
there and he's
video.
like,
Yeah.
he was an incredible warrior who never feared the death.
Yeah, and we have a letter, a beautiful letter out in the other room from the Marine general that was in charge, who said that he's been to more of these memorial services than he wants to think about. But it's the first time he's been at one where the Iraqis asked to speak.
Yeah. I think,
And it's in that letter sitting out there.
well, and I think it gets back to, but it gets back to the funeral for that bird. Like Travis had so much compassion. Like if you knew him, you felt that compassion inside of him and you knew that he cared for you
And he'd be there.
and he'd be there for you. That was something that was, no one taught him that. That was just how he was born, And so that definitely
Defined him.
yeah, and it was a constant throughout his whole life.
Yeah.
Well, as we lead into Memorial Day, I mean, I have shared too many times to count, my recollections and my feelings on April 29th, 2007. And, we don't need to walk through a timeline of that day, but I think important for people to understand, what was going through your head when Marines showed up at your front door.
Well, you just, lost. And I don't know how to describe it. I mean, it's like, I guess the only way to describe it is like your worst nightmare.
Yeah. I think one of the important things to note is that you've got Marines that are assigned the obligation to show up and knock on the door and share that, this Marine was killed, to share that with the family. And ours was a little bit different because one of your best friends was a brigadier general who got the reports of all the service members that were killed.
Well, he got the reports from his boss.
He got the reports from his boss. So before the family was notified, they got the list of KIAs.
Yeah.
And he saw Travis's name on that list.
Yes.
And he says the first thing he went to do was to pick up the phone to call you. And then he put the phone back down and realized they don't know yet.
Right.
And so he called your other friend, Corky Gardner, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, who lived close to us.
Right.
To say, you need to be the one to go to the house. And so along with Lieutenant Colonel Gardner was assigned, was a young man named Eric Cahill, who graduated with Travis from Navy. And he had been assigned, he was now a Marine, who had been assigned to escort Corky Gardner to come to our house. So not only did you have, and we didn't know Eric.
Right.
We didn't know him, but we later found out that he graduated with Travis. He knew Travis, but you had your friend, a guy that you had served in the Marine Corps with for many years. One of your closest friends had showed up at the door to tell you that your son had been killed. Like that, it's definitely different than what typically happens. And I don't know. I mean, I think for us, it was a better thing. It was the right thing.
Yeah, it's hard for me to even think about how that mattered one way or the other.
Yeah, sure.
So because it's, the message is the message, and it
Whoever delivers it
doesn't change the nightmare that the message is describing.
Well, I do remember though, because Mom was very upset. She kind of slammed the door. There was a lot of questions being asked, and Corky said, because they hadn't actually shared it. It was just like you knew.
Well, yeah, well, because as soon as we saw the Marine and we saw Corky, nothing had to be said, and
Right.
nothing was said.
Right, but
We
then,
kind of knew right away, and then everything went.
but Corky said, guys, you need to let this young man he had to actually say the words
Yeah,
to
we
you.
are, and your mom was somewhere else. I went outside, so your mom was inside after she had slammed the door, and fortunately, there was other family members around, so I'm not sure. I don't even remember where your mom was right after that. I remember where I was. I was standing out in the driveway,
I remember, because
and I was talking to Corky, and then finally Corky said, "Tom, you got to let the Marine share with you. He has to tell you something officially, and then we can go from there." So that's kind of, how that happened. Yeah,
and I remember when I pulled up, because I was about a mile down the road,
yeah,
and I pulled up not knowing what had happened, and I just saw
yeah,
Corky and you standing in the driveway, and I was completely perplexed. I was like, why is Corky? It didn't add up for me,
yeah,
And I always I always say that, I don't think, and you may have a totally different take on this, but for me, when Travis was killed, it was at the height of the Iraq war. And so every night, I mean, local news, national news, they would show the faces of the service members that had been killed. So it was very much in your face at that time, in a good way. I think it should have been. So it wasn't like we were blind to the fact that young men and women were giving their lives. I mean, Travis had already lost friends over there that he went to Navy with. But I think I probably use this as a protection, but I would think of it as this like needle in a haystack type thing. Like there's no way it's going to be my brother. Like there's no way something's going to happen to Travis.
right.
And so I think that's why it was so shocking for me.
Yeah, I think we all felt the same way.
Yeah.
We never felt like it could ever happen to somebody like Travis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was beyond shocking, and your worst nightmare.
Yeah. So when obviously the idea of Memorial Day changed drastically for us after Travis was killed. And I'm always very upfront to say, and I shared a post last year, and it was a picture of Travis being carried off, his casket being carried off at Willow Grove.
Right.
And, my caption was like, this is my brother, and guess what he was doing on Memorial Day? He was going to parties and unofficially welcoming the beginning of summer. And it was my message that like, it's okay to do those things, right? But we also have to recognize why we have the freedoms to do those things. So it's like making sure that we understand those sacrifices as we partake in Memorial Day weekend. I'm not the one that, and I don't know how you feel about it, but I see people will get upset when it's like Memorial Day weekend sale. Like, I don't, that doesn't, it doesn't bother me necessarily. It doesn't bother me if people tell me I'm going to the beach this weekend for Memorial Day weekend. Like, that's great. Cause guess what? That's where we spend a lot of our Memorial Day weekends. But our first Memorial Day weekend after Travis was killed, we were at the beach. We also had a ceremony there and in Avalon, where they presented us with a folded flag.
Right.
What does Memorial Day mean to you now?
Well, it's I agree with you in terms of, we got to be able to enjoy our families, enjoy what this great country is all about, and that's part of the meaning of Memorial Day. But we also should take time to thank those that have given their all for the rest of us,
Yeah.
to be able to enjoy ourselves on a beginning of summer. The other side for me is like, really, for me, every day's Memorial Day, and I think that, if we have a time where the whole country can come together and collectively just, thank our men and women that have sacrificed their all, I think that's very appropriate. If we can do that during one moment during the Memorial Day weekend or the day itself,
Mhm.
and just spend some time thanking those that have given their all for the rest of us. And I don't think it's too much to ask for the rest of us to just say, okay, bring your families together, bring your friends together on those picnics and say, okay, let's all have a toast for those that have given us
The opportunity to be here
right,
and do this.
their full measure.
For families of fallen heroes, every day is Memorial Day. At Travis Manion Foundation, we have always believed in the power of bringing families of fallen heroes together to heal and grow alongside each other. This Memorial Day, you can help make that happen. Your donation up to $25,000 will be matched dollar for dollar by a generous gift from Christopher and Mary Jane Beck. All proceeds support Travis Manion Foundation expeditions, which are unique and life-changing experiences that offer survivors an opportunity to reflect, honor their loved ones, and navigate grief alongside others who truly understand. Give today at travismanion.org and honor the sacrifices of our fallen heroes by letting their family members know that they are not alone. You always talk about a lot too, because I think I am much more affected by dates than you are. Anniversary dates, like, I don't know, for me, like, they hit me hard. Like, I feel them. And, you'll say Travis just, the 17th anniversary of Travis's passing just happened on April 29th. And you're like, April 29th is just like April 28th. It's another day without my son,
Yeah.
So, for me, it just, it brings me back, to that day. And, and I think about, again, Memorial Day, I think about a lot of the fun weekends that I had with Travis and the fun times that we have. And I think that is like, if we had an opportunity to be with Travis, especially after he graduated, like, we made the most of it. Like, we did some pretty fun things with him. Renting that house in San Diego, that was a really good time,
Yeah.
So we had some, like, and he was always up for, like,
Having a good time.
having a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a, do you call it accomplished or unaccomplished musician?
Pretty unaccomplished, I think.
Unaccomplished, but we definitely enjoyed.
He had a fan following.
He had a close knit following of he would do some nice acoustic riffs on a guitar. I still have the guitar in the room over there. And I remember sitting on the dock and just him playing, and he had some good hits.
Well, he had some good good words
Yeah.
put together.
Orange Sherbert was one of his
with
big hits.
It's some catchy tunes.
Yeah, some originals. Yes.
Yeah.
But I think about those types of times. And I think about all of the
And you never want to like give that stuff up, or not do anything to enjoy each other.
Yeah.
And Travis wouldn't want that for each other,
Right.
for us. So, enjoy the moment, but take the time to thank the men and women that have given so much for the rest of us. And you think about what it means to the country. You think about like somebody like Ronald Reagan. Freedom's only a generation away. And if we don't make sure that we bring the young people together and we recognize those that have given their all for the rest of us. You gotta keep teaching and letting people know what sacrifice looks like.
Well, and that was one of the things like that it was actually, you kind of stole my next question. It's like, how do we do that? How do we make sure that our next generation understands and appreciates?
Well, we have to get out there and share the stories,
Yeah,
and it's a lot of what we do with our character program,
yeah,
getting veterans in front of the next generation and talking about what character looks like, what service looks like,
mhm.
the stories of the heroes that have come before us, the
Yeah.
inspirations that are out there.
Well, I was I'm gonna pull it up because there was a survey done, um, a military family lifestyle survey done in 2023, and it said the proportion of active duty family respondents who were likely to recommend military service was 55% in 2016. So 55% of all active duty would recommend military service to their kids. In 2023, do you know what that percentage was?
Is it shrinking?
Well, it's 32%.
Right.
So shrinking, yes, in a big way. And I think it speaks to, and I wonder why that is. And actually someone asked me because Josh, our COO, a Marine himself, sent this to me and he said, I'd love to know your dad's thoughts on this. He said, would your dad recommend military service knowing what he knows now, experiencing what he's gone through now? And I said, well, Josh, he's got a granddaughter about to leave for the Naval Academy in June. And he goes, oh, I didn't think of that. So I guess I know the answer to that question. But like, why do you think that that percentage has dramatically decreased? Like, what do you think it's from?
What was the year that last,
2016, it was 55%.
and when
In
was,
2023, last year, it was 32%.
yeah, why? I think it as much has to deal with, the perception of the military.
Mhm.
And I think I think we've gone through so much with COVID and with
I thought that
this
played a big role.
this social change, that I think that's having an impact across the board, and also within the military and military service, and just sort of people being disenfranchised by everything,
Yeah,
just kind of throwing their hands up and a little bit giving up on our country. And I guess we can't afford to do that. I mean, we're going to have to buckle down, and we're going to have to realize we got a challenge in front of us, and we're going to have to figure out how to put some of that stuff aside. And I think a good way to do that is just to focus on those that have gone before us,
yeah.
those that have inspired us, and try to get back on track.
Well, and I think, one of the things when you talk about those that have gone before us, and, when we go to Arlington to visit Travis, there's never a time that we walk to Travis's grave and we stop there. It's like we go to see Travis and then we go to see other service members that we knew, the Brendan Looney, Doug Zembeck, Colby Umbrell. But then there's so many others that we didn't know, but we know them through their stories from their family and friends. And I feel like every time I'm
Robert
there,
Kelly,
Rob Kelly, Justin Davis, Megan McClung,
Megan McClung,
like,
yeah, Justin Davis, all the places that we visit,
yeah,
and then more, if we hear more stories about others, we're there.
yeah.
Yeah,
We just walk back and, the last time I was there, I walked back and there's a lot of service members from Afghanistan from the bombing at Abbey Gate.
right.
And we, walked
Wow,
along there and,
that's right.
but you go there and you hear these stories and it's not hyperbole. Like the stories that we talk about Travis, that he was different, that he was cut from a different cloth, like that's the stories you're going to hear about all of these men and women, and I think it speaks to the type of individual that raises their right hand to say, I want to I want to serve and protect this nation, and no matter what the cost is, And I think about it, Maggie's filling out all her paperwork for the Naval Academy. And I had to sign off because she's not 18. And there's a paper that she has to sign off on, and then I have to do it as her dependent. But it says, do you understand like what you're signing up for? Like, and it's this whole thing about like up into including your life. And I said, Mags, like, make sure you read through this.
Right.
Do you understand what you're signing? And she said, absolutely, Mom. And so she signed it, and I signed it after her. But like, again, there was no, and I think you hit it on the head. There was no pushing Maggie to live a life of military service. She's going to the Naval Academy. She knows she has to pay back 5 years in military service. There was encouragement about the opportunities that existed if she chose that path. There was giving her a deeper understanding of what it means to serve your country. And so I don't know. I always say I feel like we have an obligation for kids to understand what that is.
Yeah, I think so. And we can, if we take it, if each and every one of us take that on, and make sure we pass it to the next generation, I'm sure the percentages that you share with me are going to shift the other way.
Well, I guarantee you something. If you took a survey of the kids that hadn't gone through our Character Does Matter program, right? That hadn't been exposed to that.
Right.
And then you took a survey of, well, I know for a fact, if you take a survey of the kids that have been a part of our Character Does Matter program, where they are being mentored by veterans, they are much more likely to consider military service as an option.
Right.
Or
service in any way, shape, or form,
in some,
which is good.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, again, I feel like we could certainly talk for hours, and I feel like we probably could come back and dive into some specific topics.
We probably could.
We could, but two questions I want to ask you. The first is, how did Travis deal with failure? Like, can you think back to any times? I mean, again, he had a lot of ups and downs in wrestling, and
the only thing I can remember relative to running into challenges that he had and failure, I don't know that he ever failed in anything, but roadblocks maybe would be that he like all of us, he had a lot of frustration, but I think when the dust settled, he got back to work. And he realized that I want to get back to like him being just had an incredible work ethic, and figured that he'll figure out a way to work his way through it. And come out better on the other end.
I always say, like, from the athletic side of things, like he had like a Kobe Bryant mentality. Like, if he did bad, he worked even harder. Yeah. Right? Like, you hear the stories about Kobe where if he had a bad game, he stayed in the court and just kept shooting after the game for hours and hours. Like, that was how Travis operated in a lot of ways.
That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah. And we always talk about, you always say, anybody that knows Travis always says, like, what's something about Travis you didn't know? And we're like, he was like funny as hell. Like, and you talked about it even when he was a kid. Like, he was really funny.
Yeah.
Can you think of like a funny story? A story that kind of encapsulates Travis's humor?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. I don't know. I don't know if I can, I don't, there's just, I don't know that he practiced a lot of his humor around me. but I heard about a lot of his exploits from his friends, from you.
Yeah.
And I think it was more like
Well, you knew his quick wit. You
quick
knew,
wit, and
yeah.
he was more, a lot of the practical joke type things. I certainly hear about it from a lot of his LaSalle guys and the Navy guys and the Marines, but I don't know if I have one particular story that sort
Well,
of jumps out.
there's
You
the-
probably have a
Well,
bunch.
one of my favorite stories, and I wasn't even there for it, was when he went to the bar in San Diego, and he went with his buddy Carlo, who was a Marine with him, and Carlo's a little guy, and Travis had, cauliflower ears from being a wrestler, and
Right.
kind of had a black head, and he went in to the bar, and Carlo pretended he was a fight promoter and
Right.
started going around and telling everyone that Travis was like going to be fighting, I don't know, Chuck Liddell or something, like he was up for the next big UFC fight,
Yeah.
and his name was Kid Dynamo.
Yeah.
And like everybody was taking pictures, and he's like, and your brother got so
Into
into it,
character.
like he got into character, and like he was just nailing it,
Yeah. I remember hearing that one.
Yeah, but he was always good for fun stuff like that. I have a lot of funny stories with Travis. Probably not appropriate for this episode though.
Okay, we'll save them.
We'll
Maybe
save
we'll
'em.
do funny Travis stories the
Yeah,
next
maybe we
time.
can do that another
Yeah,
time.
we'll do better research on that.
There you go. All right. And again, this podcast is called The Resilient Life. It's about what it means to overcome adversity, get back up again. And, I definitely credit a lot of my resilience to you. And so, you may have not necessarily been trying to teach me about resilience, but I think you did in a lot of ways when I was growing up. And, I always say, like, you were hard on me. You weren't like, you
You
were.
think I was hard on?
Yeah, you
Jeez.
don't think you were hard on
That could
me?
be a lot harder.
Oh my God. Well, but I talk a lot about like when I was upset or when something was bothering me, you weren't one to like, you weren't like, oh, come here, your daddy's little girl, let me lend you a sympathetic ear. You would be like, go for a run, it'll make you feel better. And I would get very angry about that, like as a kid and a teenager, like he doesn't understand. But what I realize now is that you certainly understood the benefit that your physical health can have on your mental health. And I understand that so much more as an adult. And you may not have been trying to teach me that. You may have just been like, get out of my way, go for a run.
No, I think it was a lot about that.
Yeah, but like,
I did understand that because it's something that kind of worked for me.
well, yeah, I mean, listen, I don't know if you want me to say your age on air.
No, we're not talking.
Okay, we won't talk about that. But I don't remember a time in my life up until now where you weren't running. Like that's what you do, And so, and I certainly know you don't run because you're trying to win races. Like you run because of how it makes you feel.
Right.
But to that effect, you've taught me a lot about resilience, and I'd love to know what living a resilient life means to you.
Well, it's well, we all have adversity, right? And you're talking about that, and so we're all going to have setbacks. I'd like to call them not failures, setbacks, and so it's when we have those setbacks, it's resiliency is about sort of how we deal with those setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of talk about you get knocked down, do you get back up? And not only do you get back up, but when you get back up, what do you do about it? And so for me, being resilient is like, number one, getting back up, and number two, what are you doing when you get back up? How are you gonna learn from that setback and make yourself more resilient and stronger, from the time before you had that setback. So, and let me just add one other thing, because I think it's relevant, especially relevant today. And we talked a little bit around it, but one of the first things you have to do is, when you have that setback and you get back up, is you got to be accountable. So in today's world, there's so many that aren't being personally accountable for what happens. And you got to start right there. Start with taking on what you're personally accountable for and addressing that setback in the right way and coming out stronger on the other end. And if you pull that all together, for me, that's resiliency.
Yeah. And I think, I think the biggest lesson I learned in resiliency was the day of Travis's funeral, when you actually pulled mom and I into your bedroom. And, we were obviously grief stricken, in shock, going through all the emotions, feeling, I know for me, feeling like my life was over, like and mom certainly felt that too. And you said to us, listen, I don't know how we're going to move forward, but we are. And we are going to live lives worthy of Travis's sacrifice. We are going to, continue his legacy of service, something along that effect. And I still remember that to this day. And it was this pledge that we all made to each other. And we didn't know what that meant, but we just knew we had to make that commitment to each other. And I look back 17 years later, and to see all that has been done in his name, how all the impact that his name has brought. And, and I think that all started with that conversation there, the day that we laid him to rest.
Yeah. And, when I think back on that, a big motivator for me was just knowing what Travis would want us to do.
Yeah.
And pulling you guys in and realizing that things could get out of control quick.
Mhm.
And I felt together as a family, we needed to get grounded on what was important. And that was moving forward in a way that Travis would be proud of us.
Yeah.
And
I think a good part too would be, I think people would love to hear about the evolution of the foundation, because you and I both know we can take no credit for that. And
Yeah.
that was mom. But yeah. Well, any last thoughts as we lead into Memorial Day?
no, I think I would just hope that everyone heeds that message about sort of just taking a moment of silence during Memorial Day. And I think not only just doing it personally, but doing it with your family, with your community, and using that "if not me, then who" mantra to go out and make sure that people that are around you are engaged in that way, and thinking about our men and women that have given their all for our country.
And I think even more than that moment of silence, I would say, find a story and share it.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah.
That's great, and I should have mentioned that as well.
Yeah.
Moment of silence, and then maybe it's a local hero that you could look up and talk about and reflect on that person and have that person join you for the day, and everybody, have a toast to that local hero.
Because I think about it, if Travis was still here, you know, Memorial Day weekends would probably be very similar to what they were in the past, but there's no way a Memorial Day weekend would pass without Travis sharing stories about the brothers and sisters that he lost.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right, Dad. Well, thank you.